Hello and welcome back to the worst Warmachine channel on the internet. I'm Olorian and this is another Warmachine Weekly. Now, this is another topic coming from the patrons, and in fact, it was suggested by one of the patrons, Ryan Langner, a local here, and it's a really good one to cover, and that is planning during your opponent's turn. Now, before we go any further in this topic, I want to dig down to the root cause reason why this question's being asked, and that's going to be time. You know, if we were just talking about how to be a more effective planner of your turns, that would be one thing. But the reason why we're talking about planning during your opponent's turn is because if you don't do that properly, you get to your turn and then you're doing your planning, and then what does that affect? Time. We are now on a clock. There's a death clock. You usually have 60 minutes. And if you spend X amount of minutes or seconds planning, that's digging into your clock. So the more of that planning that you can do during your opponent's turn, hurrah. Now, we're going to be attacking this topic from two different ways. We're going to be attacking it from a logical point of view and also from a philosophical point of view. And then hopefully those two together will arm you to better do this in your own games. So I think the first thing I want to do is go the logical route. If we're thinking about how this game works logically, how can we apply that to this problem? And really, when we think about it, the way you play the game is with purpose. And what I mean by that is that when you build your list, it's with purpose. You're not randomly going and taking random things and throwing it into a list. No, when you built that list, they were all supposed to be doing certain things. I'm taking this caster because it has this feat and these spells, and I'm able to do these things. Then I built my army, and I took this battle group and these models and these solos and these units because they work with this strategy of my caster, and I'm going to be able to do this. Now, that might be a broad tactic that's in your mind right there at that time. However, it's something that you're going to be applying on the board, and it's something you should be keeping in mind that you're coming into this with purpose. When you actually go and deploy your army, you're doing it again with purpose. You're making sure that, okay, this spell has this range, I'm able to go and actually cast this there. Oh, this has to activate before this thing, so that's where I'm going to line things up on here. Your deployment is even being based on the purpose of your list that you made and how you're planning to actually activate them on your turn one. Now, that being said, building an army, deploying your army, doing your turn one is largely being done without any interaction of your opponent. Sure, maybe you're deploying slightly differently because you see how your opponent deploys and you're kind of counter deploying unless you deployed first and then that's just the way it went. Although maybe there's advanced deployment, we'll leave that in there. Either way, it's not really until we're dealing with, like, you know, turn 2, turn 3, 4, 5, like later on in the game where my opponent has done something significant now, which is now changing the way that I'm going to be doing my turn after that. And I think this is where we have to kind of talk about the anxiety that can actually be making this very difficult. I have seen across the board where the anxiety builds. We're like, oh my God, I had a plan. I knew what I was going to do walking into this, but then you did X, Y, Z, and now that changes everything. Should I do this? Should I do this? I have so many options. Do I deal with this threat? Do I deal with that threat? And that can really crack down on you. And if you get into this little, you know, siphon of thought, all of a sudden it's 10 minutes later, you haven't done anything, and you are in now very large danger just based on your clock. Now, let's understand that anxiety can be there, but let's try and control that anxiety by focusing on the logic. Now, what is the logic of your turn? If a computer looked down at your board on turn 3, what would it actually be processing? Well, it's going to be processing, first of all, what things has to happen before other things. Because if there's 0 in that category, well then great, do whatever you want. However, if there's choir that has to be activated to give this buff first to this before they go, if your caster has to go, so it has to do this spell or pop this feat, or maybe this unit has to go first because you're going to be recasting a spell over there later, maybe there's just something in the way, so this unit has to be going first before that. Anything that is in there that says this has to happen before this, that's the first thing that a computer would be trying to put into a program to plan out your turn. Then, once you have that down, it might not matter anymore. And what I mean by that is that you might think that there's a lot of different things going on, but because they're not connected, because they're not dependent on each other in that ABC type of relationship that we looked at first, well, if I have a solo do this thing over here and a unit doing a thing over here, it actually doesn't matter which one of these things are actually going to be going first. So I don't need to actually organize those. Again, if I'm a computer trying to set out this process of what I'm going to be doing, it literally doesn't matter what the order is. Now, again, you might be arguing, it's like, well, wait a second, Malorian. I actually need this thing to go first because if I can kill this thing, then this thing can be going in deeper. If I go and engage this first, it's going to be harder to shoot these things with these guns. And I'd be saying, yes, those were those things that you were assessing in that very first spot. What things are dependent on other things? And then those, you just go and say, like, this has to go A, B, C, D. Great. Let's start with A. And again, there could be those disconnected things, right? That solo on the side, that unit on the side. Well, that then doesn't matter. If I do this solo and then A, B, C, and then this unit, or maybe I go A, B, C, this unit, and this solo, or any permutation, because those are not in that sequence that I have decided has to be linked together, it literally doesn't matter, and I should not be losing any thought on what that should be doing. So then 100% of my thought should only just be on what relationships do I have in here that have to be done one before the other. And then once I have decided that those are them, cut and start. Whether I want to start going from left to right on my board or what I feel is the most important on the board, that doesn't matter. That's what you then go ahead and do. And I think if you do that, logically, that anxiety goes away, right? It's not more like, oh my God, my opponent did this. I really have to be dealing with this over here. It's like, well, no. Everything on the board on there had that purpose. There are things it's going to be doing, and literally the only thing that's going to break down then the idea of what's going to be going first is then going to be that idea of what relationships you have. Now, there's another consideration though, and something that you guys might also be screaming out there and already typing on the keyboards, and that's going to be that, okay, Malorian, I'm getting what you're saying about relationships and things that aren't connected, and it doesn't matter what permutation you do them in. However, Warmachine is a very complicated game, and it also comes down to something else. It's not just one thing about trying to figure out those relationships and then activating your models. This is a game that's so complex that you also have to kind of like think of what strategy you're going to be using in this time. I mean, for a simple jack, am I going to decide that I want to stay here and shoot? Do I want to charge in and do some damage? When I charge in, do I want to boost attack? Do I want to do a throw attack? Do I want to be doing all these different things? There's a lot of different options that can actually come into a game, especially if you got a caster with lots of different spells. Do I want to make this a feat turn? Do I want to try and gallows something in? Do I want to be putting this buff on this one or on that one? How much focus do I want to be holding? Do I have to worry about assassination? And I think as you kind of hear me talking about those things, you can almost hear that anxiety coming back into this. And for sure, that's another part where like, look, there might be a lot of choices on the table. And I think what I'd like to do though with that is move this now from my logical standpoint onto my philosophy standpoint. Now, you might be saying like, well, Malorian, this is crazy. We just said that this is a really important thing about tactics and there's all these different options. I need to do the best option right now. Otherwise we're screwed, right? This is what we have to do to win this game is we have to be doing our best action right now. Otherwise my opponent's going to be outplaying me and I'm screwed. Okay. Whew. Deep breath. Let's look at the philosophy. So going into the game of Warmachine, what is going to be determining who wins this game at the end of the day? Well, there's several factors at play. One is going to be who brought the best lists, right? If we bring in and everything else is equal and you come together there could be a person that has a better list than the other person. This is not a paper, rock, scissors scenario. However, if we start with an assumption where if I say like, hey, look, I have 2 people playing, who's going to win? You'd be like, well, I don't know. It's a 50-50 choice. That's correct. So maybe then when we then factor in those lists, that percentage is going to shift one way. Maybe it's now 60-40. Well, what if we also say inside that it's not really just the lists you bring and, the powerful units that might be in there. There's also something else to it. There's also the skill of the players. Well, that skill is something that's really known. You might think that, if I go and I study a long time or something like that, I can shift that a little bit, and maybe we'll just grant that just for the argument right now. But let's also just say that in this bandwidth of skill of both players, that's also going to adjust that 50-50 one way or the other. So maybe with that first factor that we brought in, that's making it a 60-40. And when we did a skill, maybe now it's going to be 65-35. The numbers don't really matter. Another part that's going to be factoring into this thing as well is going to be what scenario you had, right? Based on your lists and your play styles, your skill, and what scenario we're on. Well, now this scenario could be something that impacts you as well. I could be coming in as having a significant list that at face value is better than yours, or maybe I have more skill than you do, but maybe it's just a scenario that favors your list, or it's a scenario that favors your play style and your skill set. Well, okay, again, that shifts that one way or the other. Again, there's going to be one last factor in all this, which is going to be luck. Because this is a game of dice, and no matter what we do during this game, one of us is going to be rolling better than the other. Sure, maybe we could say that we're both going to roll exactly average or whatever, but odds are one person is going to be having better luck in their rolling of dice than the other person. That might not change that factor a lot for when we're trying to decide which way things are leaning for who's favored, but that's something else to kind of keep in mind too, that's also having an effect on the actual game. Now, let's think about that then and say that whether we're looking at a 50-50 to start off with and which way this is going to be shifting by, or maybe we want to be thinking of this as a pie chart. And then when we're looking at the overall for what's going to be impacting and deciding who's going to be winning this game, then all the different slices of who brought the right lists, who was the best tactician, what's the scenario, what's the luck. The part that we really have to focus on either the slice of the pie or how many percentages it changes on that 50-50 relationship is how much is it going to change where you're making a different play. Now again, you might be coming up with the brilliant play that gets the assassination. And if you're looking at that little puzzle box on the table, and if I can unlock this, I can assassinate my opponent, or I can win right now on scenario, sure, those cases there where it gives you the win instantly, that's going to be massive. However, most cases, that is not the case. Most of the cases, you're actually thinking about, well, should I be going after this unit? Should I be going after this solo that's critical over here? Should I be going after this jack? And keep in mind that when I'm saying that these are all options, that there are really infinite number of options. When we're looking at the game and there's so many different ways you could move and use every single model, the number of permutations for what you could do in your turn is immense. However, we are not simpletons. We are not people that are going to be doing the wrong choices. We are taking all of those choices that were available to us, bringing it down to a narrow zone of good choices, and then picking between those which ones are going to be used right now. And I think when you think of it that way, you realize that the amount of difference that's going to be making on who's winning the game is very, very small. And so what that really means then is that when we are going back just a few minutes ago, when we're saying, well, wait a second, Malorian, there's a lot of different choices. I could be doing this and this and this and this and this and this and this. That's true. However, is it actually going to matter? Spending that time, spending that extra 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever you're going to be in the tank trying to do that with, how many percentage points is that going to raise your ability to win this game as opposed to the percentage points of you now losing this game because of the clock. How many times have you seen a really good player go into the game, have a winning strategy, but lose because of clock? Look, if I just had more time, I would have won this. That would be much more than the times we're like, oh, well, in this game here, I went for this instead of that. And there are times where they are key. I don't want to go and take that away. Whereas I just didn't realize. I didn't realize that this jack was a real threat and I needed to come in here and do this. However, it doesn't matter. This is knowledge you did not know. If you got a gotcha'd, it didn't matter how much you're going to sit there down, unless you're going to be like spending 20 minutes. And then even then, you have to then realize how much that 20 minutes or whatever would be off your clock would again raise the percentage points of you actually losing on clock and still losing the game anyway. So that's something that I really want you to focus on. So then once you realize that philosophy and being like, okay, I'm an intelligent person making intelligent choices. And even though I might have multiple choices in front of me, as a logical person, look at these, pick one that's going to be reasonably one of the better ones, move on to my turn, realize what relationships are on the table, and then once I've done them, execute them. And it doesn't matter what permutation I do, as long as I keep the ones with a relationship together and then pass the turn on. An interesting exercise that I actually find for some people is this. And it's actually a game that people will sometimes do on an actual a table, or say like even a magazine. And we used to get the ones from White Dwarf, from Games Workshop, and it would actually show a scenario. And it's just show you a picture, like in this picture here, what will you do? And people were so good at that because as human beings, we're really good at sitting down and saying like, okay, this is the situation. What am I going to do? And yet, when you are that person standing there at that time, for whatever reason, and actually I say for whatever reason, but we know what the reason is, it becomes so much harder. And the reason why it is so much harder is that anxiety and that self-doubt. The fact that you sat there through these turns, had plans, reevaluated these plans, reevaluated them again, and then being ready to execute them. You're thinking of all these things that are going on. You have that anxiety of picking the right choice, and that is actually harder than the person that just walked in off the street and just looked at it like, oh, this is what I do. That weighs on you. And I think that, again, if you get kind of like understanding how this anxiety is eating at you and making you make worse decisions. And I mean, like, the worst decisions is really just not making a decision. The idea that any decision that you would make as an intelligent person with purpose is better than sitting there and just wasting that clock. Now, I told you that we'd only have 2 ways to approach this, but I'm going to add a third one just at the very end here. And I didn't want to name it because, one, I'm sure by this point there's a lot of people that didn't even watch this entire video. Plus, this is not a strategy that I should be suggesting to a person that wants to win games. And what this third bonus strategy is from Malorian is don't care and just do something. Because as a player, one of the best ways for you to actually develop your skills as a player is through repetition. As you play the game, as you experience the game, you're going to remember that, oh, I did this and this didn't work. I did this that time. That worked really well. Hey, I've seen this situation before. I should be doing this. And the only way to build up that library of knowledge in your mind is just to do it. So go in there, play that game, do something. Maybe it won't work for you, but what it's doing is building your library so that next time you'll be able to have that to draw from and be like, okay, that last time Malorian just told me to go in and do this. It didn't work. Malorian's an idiot, but now I've seen this and now I know exactly what to do. Malorian seemed like an idiot in that game you lost, but in the next game, it might be setting you up for a win. So again, I want to add this one as a bonus to the end because if your goal is to win that game that you're currently in, this is not actually something that would really help you. However, when we're thinking long-term over several games, over several years, that's really the way to go. Just realize that it's better just to get in there, try something, and do it, and lose fewer games on clock. So there you go. Thanks for watching. Again, I want to throw out a big, huge thank you to all my patrons. I got 2 Overlords now, both Darrell Duncan and Dorian, and then I have all my manipulators. I have Adrian, Andrew, Brian, Jordan, Kieran, Ryan, Samuel, Sloth Monarchy, and now also Stephen Williams. Thank you to all you all and your patronage, and as well to all my regular viewers. Thank you for being here, and again, if you have any thoughts on this video, please post them down below. Maybe I said something you disagree with. Maybe I missed something. Let's talk about it down below. Maybe it's not even that. Maybe you have an idea of like, Malorian, this video is whatever. I really want you to talk about this. Post it down below and I'll add it on to my list for my patrons to go and vote on every single week. So there you go. There's another Warmachine Weekly. I hope you liked it. Bye.